David versus Goliath. The force that takes down giants. Have you ever felt too small to face the giants in your life? Have you ever looked at a challenge and thought you could never overcome it? Well, know that there is a force capable of overcoming any obstacle, no matter how great it seems, and this force doesn't depend on the size of your muscles, your bank account, or the diplomas on the wall. The story I'm going to tell today will revolutionize the way you view your problems and will prove that when true faith meets boldness, miracles happen. We're talking about David, a young shepherd who faced the most feared warrior of his time with only a sling and 5 smooth stones. But make no mistake, David's real weapon wasn't in his hands, it was in his heart. While an entire army trembled in fear before Goliath, this simple country boy carried within him an unshakable certainty that made him invincible. It's precisely this same force you need to awaken to overcome the giants blocking your success. Because you see, we all have our Goliaths, those seemingly impossible obstacles that make us question whether we can truly achieve our dreams. It could be a lack of money, a lack of opportunities, fear of failure, family pressure, or simply the inner voice that whispers that you're not capable. But today, you'll discover that there's a power greater than all these limitations, a power that transforms the improbable into the inevitable. The difference between those who give up and those who succeed isn't the magnitude of the problems they face, but the spiritual strength they carry within. Prepare yourself for a journey that goes far beyond a simple ancient story, because what happened in that valley thousands of years ago continues to happen today in the lives of ordinary people who choose to believe in the impossible. In the hills of Bethlehem, where sheep grazed peacefully under the golden late afternoon sun, an extraordinary event was about to change Israel's destiny forever. Samuel, the respected prophet and judge, walked with firm steps toward the house of Jesse, carrying the horn of sacred anointing oil in his hands. The heart of the old servant of God pounded, for he had received a direct order from the Almighty that defied all human logic. God had rejected Saul as king and chosen a replacement from the most unlikely family in the city, a simple family of sheep herders unknown even to the nobles of the region. The simplicity of that home contrasted sharply with the royal palaces, yet it was precisely there that the Creator had decided to find the man after his own heart. Samuel carefully observed each of Jesse's 7 sons who were presented before him. Tall, strong men, seemingly qualified to rule a kingdom. Eliab, the eldest, impressed with his stature and majestic presence, making the prophet immediately believe that this was the Lord's chosen one. But a clear voice echoed in his mind. Do not consider his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one the sons passed before Samuel, and for each of them the divine answer was the same. They were not the chosen one. The prophet's determination remained unshakable, for he knew that when God speaks, his words are fulfilled with absolute precision. There was an 8th son, the youngest, who had not even been called to that solemn ceremony, as he was in the fields tending the family sheep. When David finally arrived from the pasture, his hands still scarred from work and his face flushed from the mountain wind, something supernatural happened in that setting. The young shepherd's eyes held a special glow, a mixture of innocence and courage that revealed a pure and determined heart. Samuel knew immediately that he was standing before the future king of Israel, not because of David's physical appearance, but because of the spiritual presence that emanated from him like a sweet fragrance. The moment the sacred oil touched the young man's head, the Spirit of the Lord descended powerfully upon him, sealing a destiny that would transform not only his life, but the history of an entire nation. The anointing was not just a religious ritual. It was the literal transfer of divine authority, the supernatural empowerment to face giants and lead multitudes. David may not have fully understood what was happening at that moment, but his simple and genuine faith prepared him to accept any challenge the future might bring. From that day on, David's life was never the same, for when God chooses someone, he also prepares the way for that person to fulfill their purpose. The young shepherd continued to tend his father's sheep, but now he carried within him an unshakable certainty that great things awaited him. Each morning that dawned brought a new opportunity to grow in wisdom and favor before God and man. The boldness that would later manifest itself on the battlefield was being forged there, in the silent pastures, where only the stars bore witness to his prayers and dreams. David's focus remained steadfast, not only on caring for the sheep, but on the certainty that the same God who had chosen him would also empower him for any challenge that might come his way. This supernatural confidence would become the hallmark of his entire career, transforming a simple shepherd into one of the greatest leaders in human history. Meanwhile, in the royal palace at Gibeah, a heavy atmosphere of torment had taken hold of King Saul's chambers, creating a tense atmosphere that affected the entire court. The same Spirit of God that had empowered Saul to rule Israel had withdrawn from him due to his disobedience, and now an evil spirit constantly tormented him, robbing him of his peace and disturbing his sleep. The king's servants watched with growing concern the changes in their master's behavior, alternating between moments of uncontrollable fury and periods of profound melancholy. Music had become the only way to bring some relief from this suffering, for the gentle melodies had the mysterious power to soothe the monarch's tormented soul. It was in this desperate context that David's name reached the ears of the royal court, not as a future king, but as a young man skilled with the harp and knowledgeable in the songs that touch the human heart. David's reputation as a talented musician had spread far beyond the borders of Bethlehem, reaching the ears of the king's servants who desperately sought a solution to Saul's torment. One of the servants spoke enthusiastically about this young shepherd, who not only played masterfully but was also a mighty man of war, prudent in words and handsome in appearance, and the Lord is with him. These words immediately piqued the king's interest, who saw in this opportunity a possible solution to his nightly torments. The decision was quickly made. David was to be brought to the palace to serve as the king's personal musician. It was remarkable how God was orchestrating events to place his chosen one exactly where he needed to be, preparing him for the challenges ahead. What seemed like only a temporary assignment was, in fact, part of a much larger divine plan that would take David from the pastures of Bethlehem to the throne of Israel. When David arrived at the palace carrying his simple harp, the transformation in the atmosphere was immediate and supernatural, as if the very atmosphere of the place changed with his presence. His melodies were not just music, they were true sung prayers that had the power to break the spiritual chains that tormented the king. David's simplicity contrasted dramatically with the sophistication of the court, but his authenticity and purity of heart quickly earned the respect of everyone around him. Each note that emerged from his harp carried the anointing he had received from Samuel, transforming moments of torment into opportunities for peace and rest. Saul began to experience a relief he had not felt in a long time, and gradually came to depend on David's presence for tranquility amidst his inner conflicts. The young shepherd not only played music, he ministered healing through his songs, demonstrating that when one is anointed by God, everything they touch becomes a blessing for others. During the months he spent in the palace, David closely observed how a kingdom's government functioned, absorbing valuable lessons about leadership, politics, and administration. His determination to learn made him an exceptional student of everything that occurred around him, from the king's strategic decisions to the complex dynamics of the royal court. The humility with which he served Saul was genuine, without any trace of flattery or self-interest, making his presence a source of refreshment amidst the palace intrigues. He never forgot his humble origins, nor lost the spiritual connection that sustained him, always maintaining an attitude of gratitude for every opportunity for growth he received. David's focus remained clear: to serve with excellence wherever God placed him, trusting that each experience was shaping his character for future responsibilities. This faithful servant mentality would be crucial when the time came to lead an entire nation, for only those who know how to obey are capable of commanding with wisdom and justice. The trust David earned in the palace was not based on self-promotion or political strategies, but on the consistency of his character and the exceptional quality of his service. Saul began to see him not just as a musician, but as a young man of extraordinary potential who could take on greater responsibilities in the kingdom. David's boldness manifested itself in a balanced way, always respecting established authority, but not shying away from challenges or complex situations. Each day spent in the royal court was an opportunity to demonstrate that God's anointing on his life was not just for moments of crisis, but for excellence in all areas of service. The king went so far as to make David his armor-bearer, a position of extreme trust that placed him close to power and gave him privileged access to the kingdom's most important decisions. It was clear that God was preparing his chosen one through practical experiences that would be crucial when his turn came to rule Israel with wisdom and authority. But all was not tranquility in the kingdom of Israel, for on the other side of the mountains, a terrible threat was brewing, ready to test the courage and faith of all the chosen people. The Philistines, Israel's historic enemies, had gathered for war, bringing with them an impressive arsenal and, most importantly, a warrior who would become synonymous with terror, Goliath of Gath. This nearly 10-foot-tall giant was not just a common soldier, but a war champion whose fame had spread throughout the Corse region like a shadow of death. His combat gear weighed over 100 pounds, including bronze armor that covered his entire body, and a spear with an iron tip weighing 6 pounds. Goliath's presence on the battlefield was not merely a display of military strength. It was a psychological strategy calculated to destroy the morale of the Israelites before the fight even began. For 40 consecutive days, morning and evening, the giant would emerge from his ranks and launch his terrifying challenge across the valley separating the two armies. The Valley of Elah had become a theater of unbearable tension, where two armies faced each other, with neither side daring to make the first move. On one side, the Philistines were confident and organized, knowing they held a decisive psychological advantage in the intimidating figure of their champion. On the other side, the army of Israel was literally paralyzed by fear. From King Saul to the last soldier, everyone trembled as they heard Goliath's thunderous voice echoing through the valley. The giant's challenge was simple, but its implications were devastating. Single combat would decide the fate of both peoples, with the loser becoming the victor's servant. It was a proposal that followed ancient traditions of warfare, but one that jeopardized the very existence of Israel as a free nation. The Philistines' determination to employ this strategy revealed their complete confidence in the invincibility of Goliath, a man who had never been defeated in single combat. Meanwhile, in the Israelite camp, despair grew with each passing day, as no one brave enough to face the giant emerged. The atmosphere in Saul's army was one of utter despondency, with seasoned soldiers whispering among themselves about the impossibility of the mission and questioning whether it was truly worth dying for a lost cause. The king himself, who had demonstrated courage in previous battles, found himself completely intimidated by Goliath's overwhelming presence. The offers of reward were tempting: abundant riches, the hand of the king's daughter in marriage, and tax exemption for the victor's entire family. But even these promises could not motivate anyone to accept the challenge. Faith in God seemed to have evaporated from the hearts of the Israelite warriors, replaced by paralyzing fear that spread like a deadly virus through the army's ranks. It was as if 40,000 armed men had been reduced to the condition of frightened children facing a twice-daily nightmare. The situation was becoming untenable, as each day that passed without a response to Goliath's challenge was interpreted by the Philistines as a clear demonstration of Israel's cowardice and weakness in the face of its enemies. It was in this desperate situation that David received a seemingly simple mission from his father Jesse, to bring supplies to his older brothers serving in Saul's army. The young shepherd had no idea he was heading toward a moment that would define not only his personal destiny, but the future of the entire Israelite nation. Carrying bread, roasted grains, and cheese, David crossed the hills separating Bethlehem from the Valley of Elah, his heart filled with curiosity about how his brothers were facing the challenges of war. His mind was focused on his family's mission, but his spirit was being prepared by God for an encounter that would change history forever. When he finally reached the Israelite camp and heard for the first time Goliath's terrifying roar echoing through the valley, something ignited within his heart like an indomitable flame. While all the soldiers around him ran for cover, David stood firm, watching in disbelief not at the giant's height, but at the cowardice of God's people in the face of a pagan's affront. David's reaction to Goliath's challenge was completely different from anyone else in the camp, immediately revealing the difference between a heart touched by God and minds dominated by fear. While the soldiers saw only an invincible giant, David saw an enemy of God who was defying the army of the living God. His indignation was not motivated by personal pride or a thirst for adventure, but by a genuine love for the honor of the Most High and the dignity of the chosen people. The questions he asked the soldiers revealed his unique perspective. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? For David, the question was not whether Goliath could be defeated, but why no one had yet stood up to defend God's honor. His boldness in questioning the situation deeply angered his older brothers, who publicly rebuked him, accusing him of arrogance and seeking only excitement in war. But family criticism couldn't shake David's growing conviction that God was calling him to a mission that went far beyond delivering supplies to the camp. David's determination to accept Goliath's challenge was not born of a momentary impulse or a rash decision, but of a deep faith based on real experiences of victory in the presence of God. When he finally stood before King Saul and declared his intention to face the giant, everyone thought they were dealing with an inexperienced young man unaware of the danger. But David had solid arguments to support his confidence. Your servant was keeping his father's sheep, and a lion and a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. So I went out after them and struck them, and rescued the lamb from their mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught them by the beard and struck them and killed them. These were not just stories to impress. They were living testimonies of how God had worked through him in impossible situations. The simplicity with which he recounted these victories revealed that for him, defeating wild predators was not a reason for boasting, but confirmation that the Lord was with him. His logic was irrefutable. The Lord who delivered me from the claws of the lion and from the claws of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. David's focus was absolutely clear. This was not a fight between two men, but a demonstration of God's power before a world that had forgotten his supremacy. When Saul tried to clothe him in royal armor, David politely refused, not out of contempt for conventional weapons, but because he knew his strength did not lie in military equipment. The decision to use only his sling and 5 smooth stones from the brook was not naive. It was a spiritual strategy based on the certainty that God would honor those who trust completely in his power. Each stone he carefully selected from the riverbed represented his faith in divine provision, his conviction that the Almighty never fails when one places oneself completely in his hands. The simplicity of his weapons contrasted dramatically with Goliath's sophisticated arsenal, but David knew that the real battle would be won in the spiritual realm before any stone was even thrown. His courage was not based on his skill with the sling, but on the absolute certainty that he was fulfilling God's will and defending the honor of his name. The moment of confrontation had arrived, and as David walked toward the valley where Goliath awaited him, he carried with him much more than stones and a sling. He carried the faith of a people, the hope of a nation, and the unshakable certainty that God was about to demonstrate his power in a spectacular way. The giant, seeing the young shepherd approaching with such simple equipment, could not hide his disdain and irritation. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" roared Goliath, cursing David by the names of his pagan gods. But the Philistine's threatening words did not cause even a tremor in David's voice as he responded with a declaration that would echo through the centuries. "You come to me with sword, with spear, and with javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." It was a declaration of spiritual warfare, a prophetic proclamation that this battle would not be decided by the strength of men, but by the power of the Most High God. David's boldness in publicly prophesying Goliath's defeat revealed not only courage, but a faith that completely transcended natural circumstances. David's determination was explosively manifested as he rushed toward Goliath, demonstrating that true courage doesn't wait. It acts decisively and urgently when the moment is right. The movement of running toward the enemy, rather than retreating or hesitating, was a physical declaration of his absolute confidence in the victory already assured in heaven. When he slung the stone and whirled it through the air, he wasn't simply aiming for the giant's forehead. He was unleashing a spiritual force accumulated through years of communion with God. The stone that flew from his sling was no ordinary projectile. It was an instrument of divine justice guided by the supernatural precision of one who fights the Lord's battles. The impact on Goliath's forehead was so accurate and powerful that the giant fell immediately, his fall echoing through the valley like thunder announcing Israel's victory. But David wasn't content with simply striking down his enemy. He ran to him, took his own sword, and cut off his head, transforming the symbol of Philistine terror into a trophy of God's victory. The effect of David's victory was instantaneous and overwhelming, completely transforming the landscape of war and spectacularly upending all human expectations. The Philistines, who moments before had considered themselves victorious, fled in complete panic upon seeing their invincible champion defeated by a simple shepherd. The army of Israel, which had trembled with fear for 40 days, burst into shouts of victory and set out in pursuit of the fleeing enemy, plundering their camps and capturing abundant spoils. The transformation was so radical that it seemed to be two completely different armies. The same group of soldiers who had hidden in tents now courageously pursued their enemies through the hills and valleys of the region. It was a practical demonstration of how a single person with genuine faith can alter the fate of multitudes, inspiring courage where before there had been only despair. David's name spread like wildfire throughout Israel that day, not as that of a military hero, but as that of a young man who had honored God's name in an extraordinary way. The simplicity of his victory became a powerful lesson that when one is aligned with divine purposes, there is no giant too big to be felled. The victory over Goliath marked not only the end of a military threat, but the beginning of a new era in David's life and in the history of Israel. The young shepherd had publicly proven that his anointing was not just to play the harp or tend sheep, but to lead God's people at decisive moments in history. His faith had been tested on the grandest possible stage and emerged victorious in spectacular fashion, establishing a pattern of trust in God that would become his hallmark in all future battles. David's focus had never been on seeking fame or personal recognition, but on defending God's honor and protecting the people he loved, a motivation that would continue to guide him through all the challenges to come. The determination demonstrated in that valley would become the foundation on which he would build a leadership career that would transform Israel from a cornered nation into a powerful and respected kingdom. Most importantly, the victory had set a prophetic precedent that when one fights the Lord's battles with genuine faith, victory is not only possible, it is inevitable. From that memorable day in the Valley of Elah onward, David became much more than a simple musician in the royal court, winning the hearts of the people, and especially of Jonathan, King Saul's son. Jonathan's soul supernaturally connected with David's, creating a friendship that transcended political interests or personal gain. It was a spiritual connection based on a mutual recognition of character, courage, and commitment to God's purposes, something extremely rare in a palatial environment where most relationships were motivated by convenience. Jonathan saw David not as a rival for the throne that would one day be his, but as a brother in heart who shared the same values and the same passion for God's glory. The prince's generosity was immediately evident when he removed his own royal robes, armor, sword, bow, and belt, and gave them to David as symbols of respect and allegiance. This gesture was not just a gift between friends, it was a prophetic recognition that David was destined to occupy a position of leadership in Israel, even if it meant giving up his own claims to the throne. The friendship between David and Jonathan quickly deepened, becoming a rare example of genuine loyalty in a world dominated by ambition and betrayal. Both young men shared not only wartime experiences, but also a common faith that united them beyond any social or political differences. Jonathan sincerely admired David's courage and integrity, recognizing in him leadership qualities that he himself desired to develop. The simplicity with which David treated his newfound fame impressed the prince, who had grown up in an environment where power often corrupted people's character. Long conversations between the two revealed an extraordinary compatibility of views on justice, leadership, and service to the people, creating a solid foundation for an alliance that would withstand the greatest tests. Their determination to honor God above all else created an atmosphere of mutual trust that would become crucial when Saul's envy began to threaten David's life. Jonathan would become not only a friend, but also a protector and defender of David during the most perilous moments of his life. The depth of their friendship was most evident when Jonathan made the courageous decision to make a formal covenant with David, publicly acknowledging their loyalty and mutual commitment. This was not a political or strategic agreement, but a sacred oath based on brotherly love and the conviction that God had supernaturally joined their destinies. The covenant included not only promises of mutual protection during their lifetimes, but commitments that would extend to their families and descendants, demonstrating a long-term vision that transcended temporary circumstances. Jonathan went so far as to openly declare that he recognized David as the future king of Israel, an extraordinary confession considering he was the natural heir to the throne. His boldness in publicly supporting David, even when it created tensions with his own father, revealed an exceptional character and a spiritual maturity rare for his age. Jonathan's focus was clearly on God's plans for Israel, not on his own personal ambitions, a move that forever earned David's respect and gratitude. But not everyone in the royal palace shared Jonathan's enthusiasm for David's meteoric rise, especially King Saul, whose heart began to be consumed by a growing and destructive envy. The popular songs that celebrated David's victories with lines like, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s," became a constant torment to the king's wounded ego. What had begun as gratitude for Israel's deliverance gradually turned into bitter resentment, fueled by the fear of losing power and the growing perception that David posed a threat to his kingdom. The young hero's presence, which had once brought peace through his melodies, now caused turmoil and suspicion in Saul's troubled heart. The king's shift in attitude was a tragic reflection of how insecurity can corrupt even relationships built on solid foundations of trust and gratitude. David's simplicity and genuine humility, instead of calming Saul's fears, seemed to intensify his paranoia, as they made even more evident the contrast between the young man's pure heart and the monarch's tormented soul. Saul's envy initially manifested itself through subtle changes in behavior, suspicious glances, and seemingly casual comments that revealed the storm brewing within him. The king began to question David's motives, interpreting his loyalty as calculated hypocrisy and his humility as a disguised political strategy. It was remarkable how a mind dominated by fear could distort even the noblest actions, transforming virtues into supposed defects and gestures of service into attempts at manipulation. David's determination to serve with excellence, regardless of changes in royal attitude, only increased Saul's frustration, as he hoped to find some legitimate reason to justify his negative feelings. The contrast between the peace David maintained in his heart and the growing turmoil consuming Saul became more evident with each passing day, creating a palpable tension throughout the palace environment. The court servants began to notice the atmospheric shift and tread more carefully, fearing they would become collateral victims of a conflict that was only just beginning to unfold. The situation reached a critical point when Saul, in a moment of uncontrollable rage, attempted to pin David to the wall with his spear while the young man played the harp to calm him. David's speed and agility saved him from certain death, but the incident marked a definitive rupture in their relationship, transforming what had been a service environment into a psychological battlefield. The king's audacity in coldly attempting to assassinate someone who had served him only loyally revealed the degree of deterioration in his character and judgment. David, even shocked by the attempted murder, maintained his composure and continued to fulfill his responsibilities, demonstrating extraordinary maturity and self-control for someone his age. The second assassination attempt confirmed that this was not a moment of temporary madness, but a deliberate decision to eliminate the one seen as a rival for the throne. David's focus remained unwavering: to continue serving God with integrity, regardless of the adverse circumstances he faced. His refusal to retaliate or seek revenge demonstrated a deep trust that God would see to his protection and justice in his perfect timing. The escalating persecution forced David to make one of the most difficult decisions of his life, leaving the comfort and security of the palace to become a fugitive in his own land. Saul's determination to destroy him had become an obsession that completely dominated his political and military decisions, transforming the kingdom's resources into instruments of personal persecution. David found himself forced to leave behind not only a prestigious position, but also precious friendships, opportunities for advancement, and the stable life he had built through years of faithful service. The transition from national hero to persecuted fugitive was brutal and profoundly challenged his faith, forcing him to question God's plans and trust in promises that seemed increasingly distant from reality. But even in adversity, David's boldness manifested itself in his refusal to accept the role of victim, choosing instead to use this period of exile as an opportunity for growth and preparation for future responsibilities. The young man who had defeated Goliath, with a sling, now faced an even greater giant: the temptation to abandon his integrity to survive in a hostile and unpredictable world. Life in the caves and deserts of Judea became a unique leadership school for David, where he learned lessons he could never have acquired in the halls of the royal palace. Gradually, men who had also been marginalized by society began to join him, forming a motley band of warriors who would become legendary in the history of Israel. They were indebted, distressed and embittered men who found in David not only a military leader, but also someone who could inspire hope in desperate hearts. The simplicity of desert life forced everyone to focus on the essentials, eliminating the distractions and superficialities that often obscure people's true character. David discovered that leading desperate men required much more than commanding trained soldiers, as it was necessary to first heal emotional wounds and rebuild the self-esteem of people who had lost faith in themselves. The experience of transforming bandits into honorable warriors would become one of David's greatest qualifications for ruling an entire nation, demonstrating his ability to see potential where others saw only problems. The young leader's focus remained clear: to use each challenge as an opportunity to grow in wisdom and compassion, preparing for the day when God would call him to even greater responsibilities. During the years of exile, David was faced with two extraordinary opportunities to kill Saul and end his persecution once and for all. But his response to these situations revealed the depth of his character and faith. In the cave of En-Gedi, when Saul went in alone to relieve himself, David could easily have eliminated his pursuer, but he chose only to discreetly cut off a flap of his cloak as proof that he could have killed him if he had wished. Later, in Saul's camp, as the king slept surrounded by his guards, David again refused his men's suggestion to end his enemy's life, opting to take only his spear and his water jar. These decisions were not based on weakness or fear, but on a deep conviction that it was not his place to take the life of the one anointed king by God. David's determination to maintain his integrity, even when it meant prolonging his suffering, demonstrated exceptional spiritual maturity and unshakable trust in God's plans. Their boldness was manifested not through violence, but through the moral courage to do what was right regardless of personal consequences. The focus remained clear: to honor God through their actions, trusting that divine justice would prevail in the right time and in the right way. The death of Saul and Jonathan at the Battle of Mount Gilboa marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new phase in David's career, bringing conflicting feelings of relief and profound sadness. News of the death came through a young Amalekite who hoped to be rewarded for bringing information, about the downfall of David's enemies, but was shocked by the future king's genuine mourning. Rather than celebrate the death of his persecutor, David composed one of the most beautiful laments in world literature, honoring both the memory of Saul and that of his beloved friend Jonathan. The simplicity and sincerity of his words revealed a heart free from bitterness, capable of remembering Saul's virtues rather than focusing on his failures and persecutions. The verse, "How the mighty have fallen in battle! Jonathan is wounded on your high places," echoed with genuine grief that touched the hearts of all who heard it. David commanded that lament be taught to the sons of Judah, ensuring that future generations would remember the heroic qualities of these men rather than their failures. His determination to honor with dignity those who had wronged him demonstrated a greatness of character that truly qualified him to lead an entire nation. David's grief over Jonathan's death was particularly profound, for he lost not only a dear friend but also someone who had risked everything to protect him during the most difficult years of his life. The anguish in his voice as he sang, "I am in anguish for you, my brother Jonathan. How lovely you were to me. Your love was more wonderful to me than the love of women," revealed the unique importance that friendship had had in shaping him as a person and a leader. Jonathan represented all that was noble in the house of Saul, and his death signified the definitive end of an era of transition that had been marked by both conflict and moments of great human beauty. David's focus was on preserving the memory of the positive aspects of that period, choosing to remember Jonathan's loyalty rather than Saul's betrayal. His boldness in publicly expressing his love and admiration for Jonathan, even after his death, demonstrated an emotional authenticity rare in political leaders. The simplicity of his lament, without rhetorical artifice or literary exaggeration, touched directly on the hearts of all who had lost loved ones, establishing a deep emotional connection between the future king and his people. With Saul's death, the way was finally clear for David to assume the throne God had promised him through Samuel's anointing many years earlier. His determination to follow proper protocols rather than simply seize power by force revealed exceptional political wisdom and a genuine respect for Israel's traditions. He was first anointed king over Judah in Hebron, establishing a solid base of power before seeking to unite all the tribes under his leadership. For 7.5 years, he ruled only the tribe of Judah, demonstrating patience and administrative skill as he bided his time to expand his authority over the entire Israelite territory. His boldness manifested itself in calculated political decisions that gradually strengthened his position without provoking unnecessary conflicts with the other tribes. The experience of ruling a smaller region first gave him the opportunity to hone his leadership skills and establish a standard of justice and prosperity that would eventually attract all the tribes of Israel. The focus remained clear: to build a kingdom based on divine principles, where justice and mercy would be the hallmarks of its rule. The complete unification of Israel under David's leadership represented the fulfillment of decades of divine promises and the beginning of a golden age in the history of the chosen people. By the time he was finally anointed king over all Israel and Jerusalem, David had already proven his leadership capabilities through years of practical experience as both a military commander and a civil administrator. His conquest of the Jebusite stronghold of Zion, which became known as the City of David, was a brilliant strategic coup that established a neutral capital that belonged to no one tribe. His determination to create a unified political and spiritual center for the nation demonstrated a long-term vision that transcended traditional tribal divisions. The simplicity with which he treated both former allies and former enemies revealed an exceptional political maturity and a capacity for forgiveness that was essential to healing the wounds of decades of civil war. The young shepherd who had faced Goliath with a sling now ruled a prosperous and respected kingdom, but his greatest victory had not been over external enemies, but over his own tendency to seek revenge or hold grudges. The bold dream of a unified and prosperous Israel had become reality through a combination of unwavering faith, hard work, and absolute trust in God's plans for his life and his nation. And herein lies the most powerful lesson from this entire extraordinary story. You too have giants to defeat, but the strength to overcome them isn't in your muscles, your bank account, or your diplomas. It's in your faith and your determination to believe in the impossible. David teaches us that when we face our challenges with the certainty that God is with us, there is no obstacle too great to overcome, no dream too ambitious to become reality. His boldness in accepting seemingly impossible challenges should inspire you to stop hiding behind excuses and start acting with the same supernatural confidence that transformed a simple shepherd into the greatest king in Israel's history. The simplicity of his weapons reminds us that often the solutions to our greatest problems are right before our eyes, just waiting for us to muster the courage to use them. David's focus was always on honoring God through his actions, not on seeking personal glory, and this attitude led him to achievements that transcended any human ambition. His determination to maintain integrity, even when it meant suffering injustice, set a standard of character that eventually elevated him above all his contemporaries. What incredible story could you write if you decided to face your fears with the same bold faith that took David from the pasture to the palace? Your giants are waiting to be slain, but that will only happen when you decide to stop seeing them as insurmountable obstacles and start seeing them as opportunities to demonstrate the strength that lies within you. Victory is already assured for those who truly believe. The question is, are you ready to pick up your sling and face your Goliath? If this content touched your heart and awakened your faith for greater things, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we have many more inspiring stories that will transform the way you view life's challenges. And in the comments, tell me, which giant will you defeat after hearing this story?